Hey everyone, here's my review of Dominator at King's Dominion in Virginia. Dominator opened in 2008, and it's a B&M Floorless coaster. It has a top speed of 65 miles per hour, a max drop of 148 feet, a chain lift, and 5 inversions. In this review, I'm going to go over the layout and theming, and rate the ride out of 10 based on these 5 categories: intensity, ride smoothness, duration, fun factor, and invert. So starting with the layout, as you dispatch from the station, there's a small dip that goes into a strangely long pre-lift. There isn't much to it, and it just exists for some reason. After that awesome drop, you start up the 158-foot tall lift. The views going up are pretty average, but it is nice seeing the Eiffel Tower and International Street. Once you reach the top, there's a classic B&M pre-drop, followed by the 148-foot drop at a 57-degree angle. Like most drops, the front is underwhelming, but it is cool how you sort of hang sideways before the rest of the train descends. In the back, you won't get airtime, but there is a good tug as you go down. Overall, it's a typical B&M Floorless drop. I would also like to add that the first time I rode Dominator, I did get the stomach feeling, but more recently, that hasn't been happening. After that, there's a forceful pullout where you hit your max speed of 65 miles per hour, followed by the first inversion, a vertical loop. And for most people, this is probably going to be the standout of the ride. It's tall, intriguing, and going upside down at that height is just cool. I do think it's one of the better elements of the coaster, but I'll get to my favorite part later. In terms of forces, it's not bad. I do prefer this moment in the front because you sort of stall while looking at the ground, but in the back, you do get some airtime so you can decide which sensation you like more. Next up are 2 fast-paced overbank turns that give you a very good sense of speed. They don't pull the most forces, but those forces are sustained for a long time, so they actually end up being quite intense. Following those turns is the Cobra Roll, which has inversions 2 and 3. In my opinion, this element doesn't do a whole lot for me, but there are good positives entering it in the front and exiting it in the back. I've definitely been on better Cobra Rolls, but by no means is it a bad part of the coaster. And also, make sure to pose while exiting it, because the on-ride photo is at the bottom. Then there's a gradual ascend to the mid-course brake run. Usually, the trims don't hit, so you can get plenty of airtime from the drop off the mid-course in the back rows. This is also my favorite part of Dominator, because I prefer airtime more than inversions and positives. Next, there's some straight track that leads into a pair of interlocking corkscrews. These corkscrews are surprisingly snappy and intense, but a downside is that I did get some headbanging going through them. It wasn't horrible, and it didn't take away from the elements, but it was enough to give me a slight headache. To end off the ride, there's a high turn, followed by a quick low-to-the-ground helix, and another gradual rise into the final brakes. I also got a little headbanging during this part of the coaster, but it wasn't as bad as the corkscrews. The helix also feels extremely intense and a crazy way to finish an already intense roller coaster. So now let's go over the theme. And yeah, there's no theme for Dominator.
Oh my god, bro. Oh, hell no, man. What the
The track is orange and the supports are dark blue. That's it. Okay, moving on to the part of the review where I rate the ride out of 10 based on 5 categories, starting with intensity. Though Dominator doesn't pull the most positive Gs, the forces that it has are very, very sustained. The entire coaster is just positives, 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 with the only exception being the drop off the mid-course. It's very tiring, and half the time I ride Dominator, I get off with a slight headache because of the insanely sustained Gs and the long ride experience. So in my opinion, Dominator gets an 8 out of 10 for intensity. Next up, ride smoothness. Dominator is a very smooth coaster for it being over 20 years old. But with that being said, the second half is pretty shaky. I'm not sure why the slower part of the layout is rougher, but it is, and I can see it taking away from the ride experience for some people. Nonetheless, Dominator is still getting a 7 out of 10 for ride smoothness because for it being a forceful coaster and being over 20 years old, it's not running too bad. Now for the third category, duration. Dominator is a fairly long experience from start to finish, but in my opinion, it might be a bit too long. I think that after the corkscrews, the ride just gets sort of boring, and I often think to myself, I wish it would end already. I'm still giving Dominator another 7 out of 10 because a long ride is a long ride, even if it might be a bit too long. The next category is fun factor, and I'm giving Dominator yet another 7 out of 10. As I mentioned in the last category, there's a moment during the coaster where I just want it to end. The first half is good with all of the speed you have and the massive inversions, but the second half is just okay. I usually stop having fun during or after those corkscrews. And now for the final category, inversions. Dominator's inversions are massive and awesome to look at. They have power and some have good whip. But it is just a B&M Floorless, and you can find these inversions on many other coasters, so I can't give it any higher than a 6 out of 10. Just the fact that Dominator excludes the best inversion on a B&M looper, the 0G roll, and the fact that some of the inversions have a rattle, it only gets a 6. So for Dominator's final score, it gets a 7 out of 10. Overall, Dominator is an average floorless by B&M. The elements and inversions are fast and forceful, but not without having a small rattle. If you can look past that, however, it's a good roller coaster. I've heard people say it's the most enjoyable coaster at King's Dominion because the positive G's don't make you black out and the airtime won't try to fling you to the moon. Some people I know actually have this as their number 1 in the park. But for me, I have it as number 4 in the park, just behind Grizzly. That might be controversial, but I prefer Grizzly's airtime to Dominator's intensity. Dominator is currently my number 13 overall, and I prefer riding in the front to feel the speed, and it's a bit more enjoyable. My only complaints are that the second half is a bit shaky and drawn out. One final thing, this coaster makes a great impression as you pull up to King's Dominion. So that's going to wrap up my review of Dominator at King's Dominion. If you like this review, then please leave a like and consider subscribing for more theme park content. Thanks for watching to the end, and have a good day.